अहम खबर शामिल कंदासीं। पॾेही वज़ीर बलावल भुट्टो ज़रदारी जो अमरीकी नशियाती इदारे के इंटरव्यू ॾिनो आहे। हुन चयो आहे त अफ़गान छो अवाम घणनि मसइलनि खे मुंहुं ॾेई रहियो आहे। अफ़गान मसइले जे हल लाइ गॾियल क़ौमुनि सां गॾिजी कमु करे रहिया आहियूं। इस्लामी तालीम में औरतुनि जी तालीम ते ज़ोर ॾिनो वियो आहे। मौजूदु अफ़गान हुकूमत औरतुनि खे तालीम ॾियारण जी ख़ातिरी कराई आहे। संदसि चवणु हो त उमेद आहे त अफ़गान हुकूमत औरतुनि जे हक़नि बाबति कयल पंहिंजो वाइदो पूरो कंदो। अफ़गान सूरताल जो सिधो संहूं पाकिस्तान ते असरु पवे थो। बिलावल भुट्टो ज़रदारी जो इहो चवणु हो। शहीद बीबी जे सॼी ज़िंदगी पसंद क़ुवतनि ख़िलाफ़ जदोजहद में गुज़री। पीपल्स पार्टी इंसानी हक़नि ऐं जमहूरियत जे तहफ़ुज़ वारी जदोजहद ते यकीन रखे थी। अहम ख़बर अवां सां शेयर कयूं पिया। पॾेही वज़ीर बिलावल भुट्टो ज़रदारी जो अमरीकी नशियाती इदारे के इंटरव्यू ॾिनो आहे। हुन चयो आहे त अफ़गान जो अवाम घणनि मसइलनि खे मुंहुं ॾेई रहियो आहे। अफ़गान मसइले जे हल लाइ गॾियल क़ौमुनि सां गॾिजी कमु करे रहिया आहियूं। इस्लामी तालीम में औरतुनि जी तालीम ते ज़ोर ॾिनो वियो आहे। मौजूदा अफ़गान हुकूमत औरतुनि खे तालीम ॾियारण जी ख़ातिरी कराई आहे। संदसि चवणु हो त उमेद आहे त अफ़गान हुकूमत औरतुनि जे हक़नि बाबति कयल पंहिंजो वाइदो पूरो कंदो। अफ़गान सूरताल जो सिधो संहूं पाकिस्तान ते असरु पवे थो। बिलावल भुट्टो ज़रदारी जो इंटरव्यू दौरान चवणु हुयो। नाज़ी अवां खे आगाह कयूं पिया। पॾेही वज़ीर बिलावल भुट्टो ज़रदारी कुझु देरि अॻु अमरीकी नशियाती इदारे CNN खे इंटरव्यू ॾेई रहियो। अचो तव्हांखे ॾेखारियूं।
With Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Foreign Minister Bhutto Zardari, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. So can I just start by asking you, I know you're in New York, how significant is it for you that this government, the Taliban government, seems to have said that it's brokered a ceasefire between those two warring sides? Do you accept that? Is that correct?
As far as the terrorist issues are concerned, Pakistan has been worried about the increase in terrorist activity, and we are looking to the regime in Afghanistan to play their role in discouraging an increase of terrorist activity, and this is indeed an encouraging sign. We continue to not only monitor this situation, but work on our side to ensure that we can tackle the threat of terrorism, and hope that the regime in Afghanistan lives up to their international commitment to not allow their soil to be used for terrorism.
Foreign Minister, you're at the United Nations. The UN has a whole raft of sanctions against the Taliban. I don't believe any country, even yours, has recognized this new government. Correct me if I'm wrong. What will it take for your country, let's say, to accept the government here in Kabul?
As far as recognition is concerned, we are working with the international community, and we'll take those decisions in step, in line with the international community. At the same time, we continue to advocate for engagement, and particularly in light of the humanitarian crisis developing in Afghanistan. We believe it is not good for the people of Afghanistan, and it's not good for the region or indeed the international community if 95% of the people of Afghanistan descend into poverty. It would not be a good message for the international community to send, or indeed for us in Pakistan to send to the people of Afghanistan, if they get the impression that we're abandoning them in this difficult time. So we're emphasizing increased humanitarian efforts, and also underscoring the importance of ensuring that there isn't a complete collapse of the Afghan economy. Of course, that too will have disastrous implications for the people of Afghanistan. Simultaneously, we in the international community are emphasizing the importance to the new regime in Afghanistan that they live up to international commitments, be it vis-a-vis terrorism or more specifically, their commitments to women's education and the education of girls in Afghanistan. And we feel if they live up to international commitments, it would be easier for us and others to fight the case for an increased support for humanitarian efforts and a stabilization of the Afghan economy.
You are obviously a Muslim country. I think the world's first Islamic republic was Pakistan. You have historically a lot of influence on the Taliban. You just heard Fatima Gailani, former MP and women's rights activist, peace negotiator. She said that countries such as yours and other Muslim nations also need to put their weight in with the Taliban. Do you have any notions of perhaps your government, trying to persuade them, coming here, talking to them, taking them around, showing them what a proper Muslim country, Muslim countries can do to give some kind of rights to women?
So as far as our efforts are concerned, I'd like to repeat that it is very important to emphasize the humanitarian crisis developing in Afghanistan and all the steps that we can take to try and avert that. I appreciate the MP who spoke before me. She has been a very brave contributor to her own country. And as far as women's rights are concerned, as far as the right to women educations are concerned, she's absolutely right. We don't see this, I don't see this as an issue of the West. I see the women's rights or a women's right to education as rights granted to us from Islam. The the first word in the Quran is Iqra, to read. It doesn't say only men read. We are all meant to pursue our path to education, and indeed in our private interactions and on a public level, we will be emphasizing the importance to ensure a right to access to education, not only because it is a commitment between the Taliban government and the international community, but also these are rights guaranteed to women in Islam. Pakistan is the country in the Muslim world which saw the first female Prime Minister elected, Shaheed Mohtarama Benazir Bhutto. She was elected the first time, the second time, and if she was not assassinated, she would have been elected a third time. These are achievements within the Islamic world. So the Islamic world will be working together to help relieve and alleviate the humanitarian crisis, to insist that the economic collapse of Afghanistan is a disaster, not only for Afghanistan but for the region, but simultaneously we'll be emphasizing that the Taliban keep their international commitments and we ensure rights to the women of Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Foreign Minister, you mentioned your mother, the late Benazir Bhutto, who was tragically assassinated. You know, she actually, in the 90s, when she was Prime Minister, and I'm just going to make sure I get this right, because I remember it, publicly supported the Taliban. This was all part of this endless Pakistani-Indian political standoff. And your former Prime Minister, Imran Khan, after the fall of Kabul, as the Taliban call it, the liberation of Kabul, he actually said the same thing. He welcomed the Taliban takeover, saying the chains of slavery for Afghanistan had been broken.
Thank you for your question.
The United States believes that your country has played a very dangerous role in supporting the Taliban over the decades.
Since you've raised it, I'd like the opportunity to engage with this question properly. I thank you for it. As far as my mother's words are concerned, I think that they're taken out of context, and it's quite unfair to say that, given she was assassinated by extremist forces in Pakistan while fighting the case against Islamic extremism and terrorism, both in our country and Afghanistan and across the world. As far as the recognition of the Taliban government in the 1990s, it is indeed true that when my mother became Prime Minister, she did not reverse the decision of the government preceding hers to recognize the Taliban government at the time. Pakistan has consistently had engagement with Afghanistan, no matter who has been in power, and absolutely we have had disagreements about the way this conflict has progressed and developed. We have always been advocates of the fact that alongside action against terrorist activity, ultimately the resolution of the dispute in Afghanistan was dialogue and diplomacy, and ultimately, despite Pakistan being on the receiving end of criticism for maintaining and sustaining this position, the international community ultimately went down that route when they're resolving the conflict and the issues in Afghanistan. We now want to look to the future and the present situation and the future rather than going into the past. Pakistan is neighbor with Afghanistan. We can't change our neighbors. We have to understand that, and the developments in Afghanistan have a direct impact on the lives of the people of Pakistan. There's a lot of blame to go around about how this situation developed. If we focus on that, I think it hampers our ability to deal with the crisis at hand. We must prioritize alleviating the humanitarian crisis, ensuring that there's not a total economic collapse in Afghanistan, and holding the Taliban regime to their international commitments. And I particularly want to just mention here that it was not Pakistan or anybody else, but it was the United States who had direct communication and dialogue with the Taliban regime before their takeover of Kabul, and there's a direct agreement between the United States and this regime. So if we get into pedantics about who recognized who when, that complicates the issue. It suffices to say that we all believe, Pakistan believes and the international community believes, that will not serve any of our interests if we abandon the people of Afghanistan once again.
Once again, indeed. Can I just ask you, because we did mention it, and it is historically so interesting and relevant, you know, you are Benazir Bhutto's son, you are Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's grandson. Both of them were tragically killed by extremists and fundamentalists. Your grandfather was executed, your mother, as we've said, was assassinated. And, you know, we offer our condolences. I want to ask you, as a new politician and a new leader in this Pakistani government now, how does that inform how you will be, how you will think, how you will act about this terrible crisis of extremism, fundamentalism that seems to be growing around the world?
No, thank you, and actually you noted so correctly, because it does hit close to home. My grandfather, Shaheed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, was assassinated by the dictator of the day who pushed an Islamization policy within and without Pakistan. The Frankenstein monsters that were created as a result of that regime are the very forces that my mother battled against her entire political life, and ultimately was assassinated at the hands of similar extremist elements and terrorist groups. Now, within the Pakistani context, this definitely informs my outlook, not only domestically and internationally. And while dealing with the realities, the ground realities of the situations in and around us, combating extremism, combating terrorism, spreading the peaceful, progressive message of Islam, advocating for human rights, for women's rights, for democracy, are incredibly important to myself and my party and form the basis of our manifesto. And we will continue to do so in whatever capacity we find ourselves in. At the moment, there's a unity government in Pakistan where all political parties have come together to push electoral and democratic reforms. And despite our diverse opinions, outlooks, and manifestos, in the larger national interest, we have come together to pull our country out of a multitude of crises, including a threat to our democracy, our economy, and obviously the threat of extremism and terrorism.